Today I'm going to show you guys step by step how I created this top. Now this top pattern just does come by itself in sizes extra small through 3XL and has written tutorial. It is available at the link in my bio. This is the Karma top. If you're looking for the entire dress, this is also available. You can purchase the entire dress, but for now we are just doing the top and I'm going to take you guys step by step how it was made. So you can see I have all of my pattern pieces for the top laid out. This is my main fabric. We're going to exclude that mesh piece. We'll come back to that later. First things first, I'm going to iron on a light to mid-weight interfacing. This is going to give it structure, and we're going to start sewing this side by side. So you can see when I flip this over, I've already added my interfacing. So to start off sewing, we're going to take our center back piece and our back side piece, place those right sides together, pin in place, and sew it down. Once that's done, we're just going to repeat those same steps with our side front, pin in place, and sew down once more. And then finally, we're going to do that with our center front and connect our last piece for this side, pin in place with right sides facing, and then sew down. Once that's done, you should have something that looks like this. We are going to repeat all of those same steps for our other side. Don't connect these at the center yet. We're just going to go side by side first. Now we're going to repeat all of the steps we just did for our lining. So we technically have 4 pieces, 2 lining pieces, 2 main fabric pieces, and we're going to press all the seams for both our main fabric and our lining. And you can use the tailoring hand when you get to those curves, just so make sure everything's nice and flat. Once everything is nice and flat, we are going to start with 2 of our boning pieces. There are 4 total, but we will do the other 2 later on. So first I'm going to measure how long I want this. I want to start about 3/4 of an inch from the top and stop 3/4 of an inch from the bottom, and I'll cut 2 of these. This is going to go right at your seam that connects your center front and side front. And we are going to sew this into the seam allowance. So you can see I want it right at the center, and I'm going to sew it onto each side of my seam allowance. I'll show you what I mean. But when you do it this way, it's an invisible method. So on the outside of your garment, you will not see these seam lines. It is just sewn into the seam allowance, and we'll do that for both sides of our corset. Now we're going to grab our mesh piece and we are going to connect our 2 top pieces. We're going to start doing right sides facing. Place your mesh piece and pin it to one side of your top. Sew that down into place, and then you're going to do the same thing with the opposite side. Something to be very careful of when you're doing this is make sure you're just sewing the mesh onto the other side of your top and not your top onto your other top, your 2 tops together, if that makes sense. So you're only sewing the mesh. They're very, very close together, so you kind of have to move the other one out of the way when you get towards the bottom, but you should just be sewing mesh to the other side of your top, and it will look like this when you're done. Now it's time to add on our lining. So this might be a little confusing if you've never done this method, but we're going to take it really slow. I'm going to take my corset and I am going to fold it. So we're going to go one side at a time. Once I have it folded, I'm going to move one side out of the way, and I'm going to take my lining and I'm going to put this right sides to right sides. This is my right side to the piece that's on the bottom. And we're going to pin all the way around the center that connects at the mesh, and then all the way around the top, making sure that all my seams are aligned. So my seams on my lining and my seam on my main fabric are matching up as I do this. So I have that pinned down. I'm going to sew everything in place. Once it's sewn, it should look like this. I'm going to trim off some of that seam allowance, and then once I've done this, I'm going to flip it inside out, and I'm going to repeat those exact same steps that we just did for my opposite side. So I'm going to fold my corset in half, and then I'm going to take my other lining, I'm going to pin, and again I'll show you once this is all sewn up what that will look like. And then once that's sewn up, just like we did the other side, we are going to trim off that seam allowance so that it lays a little bit flatter. Now we're going to flip everything right sides out, and I'll show you what your top should look like currently. Now we're going to take our corset and take one side and flip it inside out. You can see I've done that here, and we are going to measure another boning channel that goes from your center to where your mesh meet each other. And I'm going to measure that again 3/4 from the bottom and 3/4 an inch from the top, and I'm going to sew that in to the seam allowance for one side, and I'll show you guys what that looks like when we're done. So here's one side with the boning sewn into the seam allowance. We're gonna do the same thing. To do that, we're gonna turn one side right side out and then take the other side and turn it inside out so we can get to where our lining is. And we're gonna repeat those exact same steps. I'm gonna take my other piece of boning and I'm gonna sew that into that seam allowance for the opposite side. Now we're gonna turn our top completely right sides out and it should be looking pretty good and structured right now. I'm going to press everything down. Make sure this is on a low heat and don't leave it on the mesh because it can melt. I'm also going to do a top stitch right at the top of my corset. You can also do that at the center if you wish. I left it out, so it is optional. Or you can sew down your lining from the inside, however you choose to do that. You just want to make sure everything looks nice and clean. And we are almost at the home stretch. Now we're going to work on our zipper. You are going to want a separating zipper like this. I actually had a 10-inch zipper that I ended up trimming down. You're going to want at least 6 inches here, but I would suggest getting one and trimming it down so that you have it just right. So as you can see, I'm moving my lining out of the way because we are going to start with our zipper just on the main fabric, and I'm going to flip it so that the teeth are facing away from the center like you just saw. And then we are going to pin into place, again, just on our main fabric, not on our lining for now. And I'm going to do the same thing with the opposite side. Take the teeth, flip them away from the center, make sure everything is matching up, and I'm going to pin in place and sew. I'm also going to leave just a little bit off of the end that I won't sew down all of the way. This is just because I'm going to do a bias tape finish, or you can hem it. So at that very bottom part, I will not sew it down. Once that's all sewed down, it should look like this. Now we're going to take our lining, flip it up and over like you just saw so that our right sides are facing. So the right side of my lining is facing the right side of my main fabric. And you kind of have to flip this inside out and kind of work with it because it's attached at that center. But once you've got it right, you're just going to pin this in place. And again, the right side of my lining is facing the right side of my main fabric. Once that's all pinned, I'm going to sew that in place. And it should look like this. We're going to flip that inside out and you'll see I have a clean zipper from the inside and the outside, and we're going to repeat those exact same steps for the opposite side. Now that that's all done, we're going to flip everything right sides out. Check your zipper, make sure it's looking okay. If you trimmed your zipper like I did, make sure you finish off that top part so your zipper doesn't just slide right up and off. You can do that just by doing a back and forth stitch on your sewing machine. Now I'm going to make my bias tape. You do not have to do this. You can purchase bias tape, or if you just want to hem your corset, that is also an option. I think a bias tape finish is a little bit cleaner, but it's up to you. There's also multiple ways to do this, so pick whichever you like. This is just the way I like to do it, but I start by taking my bias tape and putting it right sides facing and aligning the bottom of my top to the bottom of my bias tape. And you can see I flipped in the corner right there so that when we flip it over, it looks nice and clean. Once I have this all pinned, I'm going to sew it down. Once that's all sewn down, I'm going to flip this to the opposite side, and I'm flipping this all the way so that the bias tape isn't visible at all. Again, there's a couple ways you can do this if you want your bias tape visible at the bottom on the outside, but I'm flipping this all the way so that you will not see the bias tape from the opposite side, and I'll show you what I mean when we're done with this. I also like to make sure that finish is on the inside so you don't see any raw edges. And then once that's ready, I'm going to pin this in place. And if you can't tell, I am folding in the raw edge of the bias as I pin this. If you're having trouble making your bias tape look super neat, make sure you press it to make sure all of your edges are really nice. I also like to flip this over to the other side to make sure everything looks nice before I end up sewing it down, just so I know my bias tape looks right. Since this is our last step, we want to make sure we get it right. Once you're done, you can give this a nice press and you have a completed top that you can wear on your own, or you can attach to a skirt or wear with a skirt, pants, whatever you like. If you did see the final version of this and you're wondering how I got that kind of floral beaded, it is actually these. They are from Amazon. So if you want to add these onto your dress, that is totally up to you. I think they give a really nice effect. And thank you guys for watching this tutorial. Please let me know if you have any more questions, and follow along if you guys want to see what the next pattern release is.